Khateeb series in Human Anatomy and Physiology. Chapter 1. Episode 6. Body cavities in anatomy. In the intricate design of the human body, cavities are spaces that house and protect internal organs. These cavities develop during embryonic growth as tissues fold and compartmentalize, creating distinct spaces for various organ systems. Anatomically, body cavities are categorized into two primary divisions: the dorsal or posterior cavity, and the ventral or anterior cavity. The dorsal cavity, located along the posterior aspect of the body, comprises the cranial cavity which encases the brain, and the spinal or vertebral cavity, which houses the spinal cord. In contrast, the ventral cavity, situated on the anterior side of the body, includes the thoracic cavity, which encompasses the heart and lungs, and abdomino-pelvic cavity which contains the reproductive organs. The diaphragm separates the thoracic cavity from the abdomino-pelvic cavity. Furthermore, the abdomino-pelvic cavity is further divided into the abdominal cavity containing digestive organs, and the pelvic cavity, which houses reproductive organs. Notably, there is no physical barrier between these two cavities. Let's begin by exploring the precise location, content, function, and division of these body cavities. The first dorsal or posterior cavity is the cranial cavity. Let's magnify this cavity to a better view. We observe a bean-shaped space within the upper skull that houses and protects the brain. This cavity is formed by 8 cranial bones, collectively known as the neurocranium. Now, let's take a closer view of the second dorsal cavity, or known as the spinal cavity. This cavity houses the spinal cord, which is a cylindrical structure of nervous tissue that extends from the brainstem downward. Within this view, we recognize that the vertebrae of the vertebral column form the boundaries of this cavity, affording protection to the delicate spinal cord. Moving to the anterior surface of the body, we observe the first anterior cavity, which is the thoracic cavity. This chest space houses vital organs essential for respiration, circulation, and digestion. To understand the borders and contents of this cavity, let's delve into this space. The major organs contained in the thoracic cavity are the heart, lungs, esophagus, trachea, thymus gland, major blood vessels, nerves, lymphatic structures, and the diaphragm. The architectural marvel of the thoracic cavity ensures not only a sturdy shield for these organs, but also maintains the flexibility required for respiration and movement. Its superior boundary, known as the superior thoracic aperture, opens toward the neck and is framed by the manubrium of the sternum, the first pair of ribs, and the body of the first thoracic vertebra. Inferiorly, the inferior thoracic aperture is largely sealed off by the diaphragm that separates the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, as said before. Anteriorly, the cavity is shielded by the sternum, while posteriorly, it is reinforced by the vertebral column. Laterally, the rib cage forms a protective enclosure, with 12 pairs of ribs curving around to safeguard the heart and lungs within. Within the human thoracic cavity lie 3 essential subdivisions: the pleural cavities, the pericardial cavity, and the mediastinum. The 2 pleural cavities are spaces between the layers of each pleura that surrounds each lung. Centrally located, the mediastinum is the space between the 2 lungs. This space houses all previously mentioned thoracic organs and structures, except the lungs. Within the mediastinum, we observe the pericardial cavity, which is found within the pericardium that surrounds the heart. Notably, the pleura and pericardium are 2 major serous membranes filled with fluid. The structure and function of these serous membranes will be discussed later in this series. Let's take a cross-section of the thoracic cavity. We can see the pleural cavities surrounding each lung. We also observe the mediastinum between the 2 lungs containing the heart and blood vessels. In the mediastinum, notice the pericardium and pericardial cavity around the heart. Now let's discuss the divisions of the central mediastinum and organs contained in each division. We can observe that the mediastinum is divided into superior and inferior sections by a plane at the sternal angle extending to the T4-T5 vertebrae. The superior mediastinum houses structures such as the thymus, trachea, esophagus, and major blood vessels like the aortic arch and superior vena cava. The inferior mediastinum by itself is divided into three compartments. The first compartment is the anterior mediastinum, which contains connective tissue, lymph nodes, and remnants of the thymus. The second part is the middle mediastinum, houses the heart within the pericardium, ascending aorta, pulmonary trunk, and main bronchi. The third part of the inferior mediastinum is the posterior part, includes the descending aorta, esophagus, and thoracic duct. The abdominopelvic cavity is a continuous space within the human body that extends from the diaphragm down to the pelvic floor. It is divided into two regions. The abdominal cavity, which occupies the upper portion, and the pelvic cavity, which lies below. However, there is no physical separation between these two cavities, and they house essential organs involved in digestion, excretion, and reproduction. When talking about the boundaries of the abdominopelvic cavity, we can observe that the diaphragm separates it from the thoracic cavity. However, the pelvic floor muscles form its base. Anteriorly, the abdominal wall muscles enclose the cavity, while posteriorly are the vertebral column and back muscles. Laterally, we can see that the lower ribs, iliac crests, and abdominal muscles define its borders. Now let's discuss the precise contents of the abdominopelvic cavity. The abdominal cavity contains most of the digestive organs, including the stomach, liver, gallbladder, small intestine, most of the large intestine, pancreas, and spleen. In addition, this cavity is lined by the double-layer membrane which is called the peritoneum. Similar to pericardium and pleura, this peritoneum is the third serous membrane in our body that encloses and protects many of these abdominal organs, providing lubrication to reduce friction during movement. Notably, the majority of these digestive organs are located at the anterior part of the abdominal cavity. However, located at the posterior inner part of the abdominal cavity, outside the peritoneal lining, are the kidneys, the abdominal aorta, and the inferior vena cava. Looking back to the pelvic cavity, it contains the urinary bladder, sigmoid colon, rectum, and the majority of reproductive organs, with structural differences between males and females. With respect to the divisions of the abdominal cavity, this cavity can be divided into 4 quadrants, or 9 regions, to help locate organs and diagnose conditions. As shown in this image, the 4 quadrants are the simpler and commonly used in clinical setting. These include right upper, right lower, and left lower. On the other hand, the 9 divisions of the abdominal cavity are right and left hypochondriac, which are located at upper sides of the abdomen cavity, just under the ribs. Epigastric region, which is upper middle, at the stomach area. Right and left lumbar regions, which are located at the middle sides of the abdomen near kidneys. Then, we have the umbilical or central center region, which covers the small intestines. Also, we have the right and left iliac regions, which can be found at the lower sides of the abdomen near hips. The last region is the hypogastric, which is found at lower middle area and contains the bladder and reproductive organs. This 9 areas are essential for identifying pain sources, guiding surgeries, and improving medical communication.